I want to tell you about a courtroom in Indiana. A 24-year-old man walks in. His parents are sitting front and center. Dozens of church members fill the gallery behind them. And when the judge speaks, he uses the word egregious twice. But here's what stopped me when I first read about this case. His father runs a Christian podcast called Jesus, Sex, and Politics. And one of the episodes they quietly deleted? It was specifically about combating CSA and SX trafficking. I had to read that twice. So let me give you the background. Jonathan Peternell, 24 years old. Pendleton, Indiana, grew up in church, son of a pastor. By every external measure, the kind of kid you'd hold up as an example. His father, Nathan Peternell, is the lead pastor at Life Church in Indiana. And Nathan isn't just a local pastor. He's spent years building a real political and religious profile in this state. He's a close associate of Micah Beckwith, Indiana's Republican lieutenant governor. They co-hosted a podcast together, talked about faith, government, sensual morality, Jesus, sex, and politics. Now, when I tell you that podcast is relevant to this case, I mean that directly. Because when Jonathan's arrest became public, the podcast went silent. No new episodes, 2 specific episodes pulled from the feed. Interestingly, the case didn't begin with a complaint from someone who knew him. It started with a tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They flagged an upload from a Snapchat account linked to Jonathan Peternell. That tip went to the Hamilton County Metro Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. They moved on it. They got a search warrant, went to the Peternell family home, and seized multiple electronic devices. When forensic analysts went through those devices, what they found was more than 200 files. Suspected CSA material, including content described in court filings as sadomasochistic, CA, and photorealistic AI-generated images of unclothed minors. I want to be clear about what that means. This wasn't someone who accidentally clicked the wrong link. The volume and the nature of what was stored point to deliberate, sustained collection. Investigators also found chat logs from a Snapchat group called Diddy Disciples, named after Sean Combs, who was convicted in 2025 on federal SX trafficking charges. I'm not going to speculate beyond what the record says, but the name of that group tells you something about how this material was being shared. And then there was one more detail that made this case go national when it first broke. More than 50 intimate photos and videos on Peternell's phone appeared to show his own parents. I'm not going to linger on that, but I think you need to know it was part of what investigators found, because it shows the scope of what they were dealing with. So let me walk you through what he was actually charged with and what happened in court. In January, Peternell pleaded guilty. 1 count of minor exploitation, level 4 felony. 3 counts of possession of CSA material. 2 level 5 felonies and 1 level 6. The plea agreement gave the court discretion to sentence up to a maximum of 6 years imprisonment. He never posted bond. He sat in custody through every court appearance. A public defender represented him. Then came Friday, sentencing day. Madison Superior Court, Judge Mark Dudley presiding. And when I read the descriptions of that courtroom, it struck me. His parents were sitting front and center. Church members, friends, supporters. The room was full. Before the judge handed down the number, Jonathan Peternell stood up and spoke. And I want to share what he said, because I think it matters. Before sentencing, he addressed the courtroom directly. Here's what he said. Your Honor, first, I want to say that I'm deeply sorry. I hate my sin that I've committed. I want to apologize to anybody who has fallen victim to my behavior. He apologized to his family, his friends, and his church community for what he called unbelievable stress and embarrassment. Then he turned to his parents and said, I'm sorry for putting you in this humiliating situation. You've been dishonored, your wonderful reputations have been ruined, and your names have been dragged through the mud, all because I cared about myself more than you. He told the court he was raised in church. He knew right from wrong. He said he made choices, his words, completely contrary to the way I was raised. While in custody, he said he recommitted his life to Christianity, did daily Bible studies with fellow inmates, completed a 12-step addiction recovery program. And he ended with this. I promise to spend the rest of my life fighting the wickedness that I participated in. Through faith in the Lord, and I trust that your sentence will be proper. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how to weigh a statement like that. I don't know what's genuine and what's performance in a moment like that. I don't think anyone does, except him. But I'll tell you this, the judge wasn't particularly moved. Judge Dudley has handled cases like this before. He said so himself, and I think that's important context. He wasn't shocked by this. He's seen it. And that experience shows in how he spoke. He said, "Certainly, I've sentenced a fair number of people that have committed offenses similar to this, and on a spectrum, you're not on the worst end. But egregious behavior is egregious behavior. You just happen to be on the lower end of that spectrum." The lower end. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. And because lower end still means 200 plus files, still means AI-generated material, still means a group chat with that name. That's where the bar is. Dudley also said he was not convinced Peter Nell posed no risk of reoffending. That doubt, that uncertainty, factored into the sentence. And then he said something that I wrote down when I read this, because I think it's the most important thing anyone said in that courtroom. You alluded to it, but what you do affects what other people do and has them exploit minors. That's pretty darn serious. And my sentencing reflects that. That's it. That's the whole thing, right there. When you consume this material, you are not a passive observer. You are part of the demand that drives its production. The judge understood that. He wanted Peter Nell to understand it too. He acknowledged the family's support. He said Peter Nell could use his time productively. And then he imposed the maximum allowed under the agreement. 6 years. 2 years probation. SX offender registry. The maximum. Not because he's the worst person the judge has ever sentenced, but because the crime, and everything connected to it, demanded accountability. Nathan Peter Nell, Jonathan's father, is still listed as lead pastor at Life Church. He did take a leave of absence after his son's arrest, but the listing hasn't changed. Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, Nathan's podcast co-host, has said nothing publicly about this case. He wasn't at sentencing. His office hasn't commented. Jesus, sex and politics has gone dark. No new episodes since shortly after police searched the family home, and 2 episodes were pulled from the feed. One of them, I need you to hear this, was an episode specifically focused on combating CSA and SX trafficking. Now, I want to be careful here, because I think being careful is part of doing this right. Neither Nathan Peter Nell nor Micah Beckwith is accused of any crime. There's nothing in any charging document that implicates them. Beckwith's silence could be on the advice of counsel. It could be a political calculation. It could be genuine grief. I genuinely don't know. Here's the image I keep coming back to from sentencing day. After the hearing ended, a group of Peter Nell's supporters, church members, family, and friends stood up and walked out together. A sheriff's deputy told them they couldn't gather in the hallway, so they went outside, formed a circle, held hands, and prayed. Jonathan Peter Nell will receive credit for time served as he begins his 6 years. The victims in those 200-plus files, whose names we'll likely never know, whose faces nobody in that courtroom ever saw, they don't get a circle. They don't get a prayer chain in the parking lot. They don't get front row seats. That's the part that sentencing day doesn't fix. That's the part I couldn't stop thinking about when I put this video together. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe and share it. Not for the algorithm, because cases like this disappear fast and the people in those files deserve better than to be forgotten. I'll see you in the next one.